Thank you for inviting me to come and speak to your group. I'm hoping that I can share some good information with you to prepare you for what's coming up in the next year or two or thereabouts. My name is Gina Wright, and I am the Executive Director of the Office of Legislative and Congressional Reapportionment, all that, for the Georgia General Assembly. Just to give you a little bit of background, I have been working in the same office there since December of 2000, so just over 20 years. And I have been through already 2 major redistricting cycles and a lot of court cases and a lot of map drawing and whatnot. So I've seen a little bit of everything in terms of redistricting and the process, and learned a lot along the way. And hopefully I can share a little bit with you if this is your first time ever dealing with any of this process. There's a whole lot to learn, but never fear, you can do it. And we are glad to help you walk through it, me and also my staff. I have a great group of folks that work for me as well. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and my presentation, and it'll kind of be broken into 2 parts. The first part will kind of just be some basic information about the process and some of the terminology and what it is and why we do it. And then I'll have a little break, and then I'll go into the local redistricting aspect of it, which is geared directly towards redistricting for county commissions, county school boards, city councils, and things like that. So that's probably the portion that you're going to be mostly interested in, but hopefully the other will be useful as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see that come up. Okay. So preparing for redistricting, local government edition. So the first thing I want to talk about is the census. Obviously, redistricting is a process, but it comes about because of the fact that we take a census. And as you probably know, the census is a count that the federal government takes of all residents who live in our country, wherever, every 10 years. And we have been in the pattern of taking it in the year that ends in 0 for quite a while now. And it is actually supposed to be your residence as of April 1st of the year that ends in 0. So as you know, we were dealing with taking the census last year in 2020, and that's what leads us into the process of seeing what needs to be adjusted as far as maps and districts and things like that because of the census. So the process of taking the census is actually mandated by the U.S. Constitution. It's in Article 1, Section 2, and that breaks down how the people shall be enumerated. And the first census that we had and that we know of was taken in 1790. So literally right after we had a new country, we took a count to see how many people we had. And through the years, as you know, the process of taking the census, the way we do it, and who gets counted has changed a great deal. This past cycle was the first time the census actually was counting people, you know, by allowing them to submit their information online. They had never done that before. That was a new thing. It actually worked out to be really timely with the pandemic that we were able to do that. People could do it safely and feel more secure about submitting their information. I think they had a lot of response that way. It's a significant portion that responded online. So the census is the bottom line beginning point for what we do as far as the redistricting process. Just a little information. The population of our state in Georgia in 2010, which was the last count that we had, was just under 9.7 million people. And we are estimated, from everything I've looked at and all the analysis I've seen, to be just over 10.7 million people as of 2020, which would make us the 8th largest state in population. As you can see on the map graphic there, California, of course, is darker, and Texas, which are also quite large compared to us geographically. But we also kind of fall just behind the states like Florida, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New York. Ohio is a little bit larger, and North Carolina is pretty close to the same size that we are typically. So we're pretty close to the same size population. So we will see what happens. We, of course, know that the census had some delays with their counting and their process last year. They were not able to do their door-to-door counting that they normally would have been doing in the spring, obviously because of the pandemic. They didn't want to be going to people's doors. So the process was delayed a little bit. The count was extended later into the fall than it usually is, which caused all kinds of ramifications down the line. And it also is going to cause some of those same challenges and different time frame for us as well, and you as well, because of that. So it's kind of a trickle-down effect from what happened with the census count. So what does that mean? what happens next? So we take a census, and the census shows us we need new maps because we've seen growth, we've seen loss of population, we've seen a shift in population, maybe from one place to another. So what this means is that the district boundaries on all of the maps will have to change, because the objective and the primary purpose of why we do any redrawing of the maps is to make sure we have as equal a population in every district on any given map as practicable. That's the bottom line factor. What we're trying to achieve is that they are equal in size, because that's the point of why we do it. And what that means is that all districts are going to be affected by the changes. Now, when we talk about statewide redistricting, like the congressional map, the U.S. congressional districts, our state Senate and our state House district maps, that definitely means that they will be affected. All the districts on the maps will be affected. They have to shift and give and take, and it is a cycle to adjust based on the population. What we see from the census data, as far as how it's spread out across the state, all of the districts will be affected. There won't be districts that are isolated and left alone because, well, they're the right size. Well, it doesn't work like that. They all kind of give and take. Unless a district happens to be located in a corner of a boundary with like in the state corners of the state, they might see the least amount of change simply because they're bordered by Tennessee and Alabama, or they're bordered by Florida and Alabama. So there's not really anywhere to go. Those are the only ones that might see minimal change, but even those will still see changes to their district lines because they do have to adjust to have the right size population. What we expect is with that 1 million person growth that we're going to see across the state, that we are going to see, of course, all of our district sizes for those maps, our congressional districts, our House and Senate districts, are going to need to be bigger. The districts will have to have more people in them than to be the same size across the state. That's the ideal district size. It will grow. Now, with local maps, I'll just throw this in there now. Every rare occasion, there may be a local map that looks at their new census data, and they see that it was evenly spread out across their county. The growth was pretty well just dispersed across all of your districts. And so maybe they all grew or changed population at about the same pace. And your county makes a decision when looking at the data that you don't really think you need to redraw. You think that they are sufficiently well balanced and equal to leave it as it is. You can make that decision. That's okay. I would say that's very rare, that it's not at least one district is not at least a little too big or too large or too small or something around there. And usually if there's one that's too big, then there's probably one that's too small. But there are a few counties in the last cycle of redistricting who did that, who did an analysis of their maps and made the decision to leave their maps as they were and not redraw. The only real consideration that might lead you to is potential litigation. If someone thought, no, they weren't balanced, they're not equal enough, or whatever the case might be, then they could file some sort of a lawsuit against that. I don't think we saw that happen in the last cycle as a result of not changing a district map. So it is an option, but like I said, it's a very rare option, and it's not used very often, but it does occasionally happen only on the local maps. The statewide maps, you can definitely expect those to change. So to shift the gear a little bit away from the census, I want to explain to you these terms. I'm sure you probably are beginning to hear both of them, reapportionment and redistricting. They're oftentimes used interchangeably. People say both and they mean the same thing, but they really do mean two totally different things. So to give you that leg up on that, so you'll know the difference and you can explain it to other people as well. Reapportionment is specifically about the reallocation of the United States congressional districts following the census. So of course we have 435 U.S. House districts, and so this is the process of determining how many districts does each state get in the U.S. House, and this process is of course dependent upon that new census count. It's a very complicated formula that they use to determine that, because because of states having different population sizes, there's not a single set value for a U.S. House district, and every state is guaranteed to have one. So even the smallest state still gets one U.S. House district, even if it's significantly smaller than what the other district sizes are for other states. So like I said, the formula is kind of complicated, but that's what they do. The apportionment totals from the Census Bureau, which are the state totals, the new state totals, are given to the president, and that is the process. They use those to apply the formula to determine which states get how many seats in the House. So this was also established in the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 3. And to give you just a bit of a history lesson to go with that, this was kind of a result of when we were first establishing our government and our legislative branch of government. This was a part of the Great Compromise, or you might remember the Connecticut Compromise, where there were states that wanted their representation to be based on population because they were very populous states. They were much larger than other states, so they said representation should be by population size in proportion to that. And then the smaller states said, no, that's not fair. We should all have the same representation. So that's why your U.S. Senate ended up having 2 senators per state. That was the compromise there. That would be every state has the same number. And that's why your U.S. House has, based on population figure representation. So that's why that process was established to redistribute those. So as we know, in Georgia with growth usually means additional congressional seats. Last cycle in 2011, we were given 1 additional seat. If you back up 10 years prior, my beginning of work in the office, 2001, Georgia actually gained 2 congressional districts then. And even further back in the 90s, we gained a seat, I believe, in 91 as well. So because we have been growing at a rapid pace, we have continued to add congressional districts. However, I will say that in all the reports and preliminary estimates that I have seen for this cycle, I do not think we're going to gain a congressional district this time. I think we'll probably maintain the 14 that we have. I've not seen Georgia mentioned or even on the bubble as to be one of the states that may gain seats. So there's even a small rumor that should our count not be as good as what was predicted and expected, that we could lose a seat. I don't know that that's true. I don't think that we, hopefully our count won't be that off from the estimates to cause that to happen. But I would expect us to keep the same 14, which will be different because in the past, like I said, we've gained seats, which changes our map drawing for the congressional map. So reapportionment is just reallocating the districts across all the states. Redistricting is actually the redrawing of the district boundary lines. So when you take an outer framework, whatever that might be, it's your city boundary, it's your county boundary, it's your state boundary, then you redraw the districts within that set framework. That is the redistricting process, shifting those boundary lines to balance them equally in population size, which is, of course, like I said, the primary purpose. And this occurs at all level of election districts. It also occurs for districts that are not used for election. Maybe they're just used for qualifying. Maybe it's a residency district is what we call it, where you have to qualify from a district, but you're actually voted on countywide or citywide. There still is a need to redistrict those residency districts simply because you want to have even pools of candidates, the same number of potential candidates in each district, so there is a fair set number in each grouping of people. You wouldn't want to have 3 times the people over here to qualify, and then over here you only have just a handful. Well, that's not exactly fair if you're qualifying. So even for those types of districts, you would want to redistrict them to make sure that they're also even and balanced and equal as much as possible. So that's the difference between the two words, and now you know that. So you can use those as they are meant to be used and interchange them. No, don't interchange them. Okay. Moving on. So when we draw maps and redistricting, as I mentioned, it's a pretty complicated process. It's not something that you just sit down with a mouse, or back in the day, a calculator and a pencil or whatever. There's a whole lot of things to consider as you draw the map. So there are what we call redistricting principles, and of those principles, there are obviously legal requirements. These are things that we must comply with when we draw our maps. The first and most important, of course, is that we comply with the U.S. and state constitutions. The U.S. Constitution mainly speaks to the U.S. House districts and the redistricting of those maps. And in those, they specifically talk about the equal population. In our state constitution, it refers to our state districts for the state House and state Senate, which are mainly just focused on them being contiguous, meaning all of the district touches itself, no islands and whatnot. So of course we want to comply with both of those. We also want to comply with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. As you may know, there was a formula as a part of Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act that was in place from 1965 through 2013. And what that formula said was any changes, if you fell, you met these certain criteria of different types of violations of whatnot related to voting rights and civil rights, then your jurisdiction would have to submit everything you did that was related to redistricting, that was related to elections, precincts, polling places, anything like that. You had to make a submission of that change to the U.S. Department of Justice. And they had another method through the court you could do, but mainly submit to the U.S. Department of Justice for what they call preclearance. And what would happen is after preclearance, they would review everything you sent them about the change, why you made the change, what was the effect of the change. And then they would send a letter back that said, hopefully you'd get a letter back that said, we don't find anything to object with on this proposal. Every once in a while, they would find something that they questioned. They would either ask for more information or whatnot. So in 2013, that was the standard practice in every local jurisdiction, as well as the state of Georgia, was all underneath the preclearance formula, and everything we did had to be submitted for preclearance up until 2013. In 2013, there was a court case out of Alabama, the Shelby County versus Holder case, that went to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and they determined that that formula was outdated, and where they struck the formula down. They did not strike down the Voting Rights Act. They only struck down the formula that said you have to qualify to submit your thing. So by striking the formula, that basically meant that no one has to submit their changes any longer to the Department of Justice for preclearance, because there's no one who qualified, because there is no formula to qualify under. Now that said, and that happened in 2013, it did not mention or strike down at all Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is the section that talks about that you cannot do any of those things related to redistricting or maps or elections that would discriminate based on race, based on color or language minority. And that section is still very much alive and active, and we still have to comply with that section to be sure that we don't do anything in our map that would discriminate based on those factors. Now there is a possibility, I'm just going to let you know this now, there is a resolution already up in Congress that could potentially reinstate a new formula and bring back this preclearance provision. We don't know if that's going to happen, and we don't know what the time frame would be, even if they did adopt this new resolution and bring this back. We don't know what that might mean, but there's a possibility that even for your local maps, should they adopt that will be coming back. So keeping in mind all of those things, yes, you have to comply with the Voting Rights Act on all of your maps for every level of district, from city council up to everything bigger. So that is definitely important. It's important in our state, and it's important that we comply with that when we draw our maps. So also we would comply with the Equal Protection Clause, which is the 14th Amendment, which says you cannot draw your map as race, with race being the predominant factor. So you can't just say that you drew this map based on race and that was what you focused on. So you can't do that either. So it's finding the balance between complying with Section 2 of the VRA and also not focusing on that solely. It's a balance between the two. There is also the doctrine of one person, one vote, which just simply means that the districts need to be equal in population. So every person in the district's vote counts the same on that particular map. Yeah, so those are a lot of the legal requirements. There's also case law and things like that courts have ruled that we need to keep in mind when we draw. So, but this is the main legal requirements that we have to consider on every map, every district that we draw. These are things we have to remember. They aren't the only things we have to think about, though. There are also some other traditional redistricting principles that we have over time have evolved and have come about, some by case law, some by other things that have guided some of our decision making on mapping when we draw and when we redistrict. So to consider some of these, you would have compactness. Compactness is basically just what you think it would be, is how compact is the district. There are formulas and measurements you can do to calculate the compactness. They give you a score. Basically, though, it really can depend on different things as to which test or method tells you if it's compact. But that's what that means. It's just how closely together a district is as opposed to stretched out. I mentioned contiguity really briefly a minute ago, as it's mentioned in our state constitution. It simply means all of the district touches itself. So you don't have any island pieces that are separated from the district. Everything is together. Another thing that you might consider is respecting political boundaries. That could be your county boundaries when we're drawing the larger districts, that we try to keep counties together and not divide them. It could be on a county map, trying to keep your voting precincts whole and not divide them between districts. That's a big help to your election supervisors if you can do that, and try to keep as many. Maybe you can't keep them all, obviously. because you're making however many districts. But if you can keep a few of them together in whole, that helps them with their ballot combinations and helps the voters know, what district they're in. Obviously, if they know everybody that votes at that precinct is in this district, and that helps them too. It could be a city. It could be that you're trying to keep all of a city in one district. Maybe you got a real small town and you don't want to divide that town between two different commission districts. Or maybe it's the other way. Maybe you have a really big city right in town and you want every district to have that, a portion of that. So it just depends on what you're looking at, but you would try to respect the political boundaries where you could, if that was something that was, a focus on that particular area of the map. Another topic that you would consider is communities of interest. Communities of interest can be defined in a lot of ways. There's not a single measure that tells us, what's a community of interest. It could be an area of people who are, maybe they attend the same church, they all live in one area, or maybe it's a school zone. They all have children in this area that attend this elementary school. Maybe it's just a shopping area that a lot of people go to this one shopping area in this area and that they feel a sense of community there. And maybe it's just a regional place that's always been there, and this little area of people have lived there for generations, and so that's their community they identify as. And so in times where you have a choice to divide or to put that all together, it might be something to consider holding that group in one district, because that would be their preference. So maybe that's one thing you would think about. And the last thing here I want to touch on is incumbent protection. When we talk about our statewide districts, we hear a lot about, well, we should not look at incumbency. We should not know where they live because we shouldn't consider who's in what district, and we should not put that into the process of redistricting. And sometimes I can understand why, but other times, that's debated for the state districts because their terms are every 2 years. They're up for election every 2 years. So there is a different argument there than what you would see for the local maps. Incumbent protection is a little bit more important to me on the local maps because you are elected typically to a 4-year term. So when you go to redraw your district map, if your board, all of your board, or even half of your board, if your terms are staggered, we're just elected to a brand new 4-year term. So what you can't do is draw them into a district or pair them with another incumbent who would then cause them to run for re-election again in 2 years. You cannot do that. That's called shortening their term. And once they were elected to a term, then you can't shorten it by redrawing them into something else, if that makes sense. So what you have to consider is one of two things. Making sure that your incumbents are in districts that are on the same election cycle that they would have been. So I'm not saying you couldn't pair them together if you really wanted to, but if you were going to, you want to make sure they were on the same term and election schedule that they were elected to, not to put them in a district that would shorten that term and make them run for re-election sooner than they normally would have. So that's something you do need to consider on your local redistricting maps. It's just a little different than on the statewide maps because of the terms and the way those terms go. So that's something to think about as you work on your local maps. There are some other emerging criteria, but I'm not going to get into all those because they're kind of new and we don't really have them in place yet. They're not really things that are adopted across the board. But what I do want to share with you is the new timeline and what we're looking at these days as far as the process, what's going to happen and when. So after you've got all those things in mind, and as I mentioned earlier, we get the new census data. The 2020 census data, of course, has been delayed, as I mentioned, because of the pandemic. In a normal, if there is such a thing, redistricting year, the data would have been, the apportionment data, which is the state totals, would have been released already. It would have been released by December 31st of the year that ends in 0. And that data would have already been provided to the president, and that process of apportioning, as I mentioned, would have already been done. We would already know this in a normal year. However, the delays that they had and some legal things that came up and some anomalies in the data and everything else, the Census Bureau has said they have given a date for the apportionment counts to be released by April 30th of this year, which is about a 4-month delay from what that normally would be. And that's just simply the statewide totals. That won't tell us your county totals. It won't tell us your city totals or anything like that. It's just going to give us a state total for Georgia. So we'll know if we hit that 10.7 million or if we didn't, or whether we're gaining a congressional seat or losing one or staying the same. That's all we'll know as a result of that by April 30th. Now, in a normal year, we would already be in possession of our redistricting data by April 30th. Normally that data comes to us in March by April 1st. But what they have said is that the redistricting data, which is the detailed data of the county level and the block level, what we use for redistricting, they've said now that data will arrive between July 31st and September 30th. So it's a huge pushback from what we would normally have. Like I said, normally that comes to us usually mid-March. Now we're looking at it coming in either August or September. We don't have any idea when that will be. What they have said to us is that it will not be a phased release as they've done in the past, because there were states who had statutory redistricting deadlines that needed to do things this year by statute. They had to do it. Those states might get their data first, though. They might get theirs in February or early March because they had those deadlines to meet. And ours would come a little later, and they were kind of in a staggered release. What they've said now is there's not going to be a staggered release. They're going to put all the data out, just one release. It's all going to come out on whatever date that happens to be in either August or September. Now, again, in a normal year, we got the data in March. We would go into a special redistricting session usually in August. So you can tell that that's not going to happen because we probably won't have the data. And even if we do, we won't be ready to go in the special session at that point. So what is going to happen? So in the spring and summer of this year, I would expect, this has not been formalized yet or approved or anything yet, but I would expect there will be a series of public hearings held across the state to discuss redistricting, to allow the public access to the leadership of the committees, both in the House and our Senate committees, and let the public come out and say the things they want to share about their thoughts on it, what they'd like to see in their area for the statewide maps. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, obviously with the pandemic concerns. It may not be like it was in the past because we might not want a whole lot of people crammed in a room, obviously. So we may want to do either larger facilities, we may want to have them outside, we may have some virtual options. They're just things that have been tossed around. We really don't know yet what that's going to look like, but there will be something, I'm sure, to allow the public time to comment on the process. And I would expect that will be in this time frame. And you definitely want to stay aware and alert on that. And so when that information comes out, to participate in those and just to be there to hear what your citizens in your area have to say about the process. Once that new data is received by my office, which would be, like I said, August or September, we'll begin the analysis of that data with the current maps. It takes us a little while to get the information formatted into our system. It doesn't just show up and you pop it in and boom, you can go. It takes us a little while to get it prepped into our system. Our software provider as well helps do some things to get that ready for us to use. Once we get that data into our system, then we'll begin to do analysis of what the new population figures look like applied to those current maps. So whatever your current map looks like, if it's your commission or whatever, we will then take that new information for your new county total and census block totals, and it will actually tell us what is the population in your current districts on your current district map. And it will calculate how big or small it is in relation to what it ought to be, and what the new ideal total should be for your district. If your county had some growth, then your districts might need to be bigger than what they were before. So it'll give us that, and we can create some stat sheet report information to provide to do that analysis. That will lead you to the decisions that you need to make as far as redrawing your maps and what you need to do. And of course, that will also be what we're doing for the statewide maps and looking at the patterns of growth and the change and things that we'll need to do on the statewide maps as well. And I would expect that that will lead us to a special redistricting session of the General Assembly sometime in the fall. Obviously, it'll be after we get the data, so sometime at least October, but probably later, because like I said, it doesn't just instantly turn around. So it could be even later, it could be November. I really don't know. That hasn't been decided yet. And so we'll have to see what happens. Now we'll also add to that, in years past, the governor, when he makes the call for that special session, has allowed for us to do some local redistricting during the special session. It helps the counties to get those maps moving if we can go ahead and get their new maps in place during the special session. But what I would expect to happen this time, because there will be such a small window of time between when we get the data and when we go into session, that there may not be a lot of time for the local process to work its way through what you need to do at the local level, because obviously there are a lot of steps that you have to take to adopt that and to draw it and to adopt it locally, and then it has to go then through the legislative process. So it may be that the timeline for local redistricting is better, that you, once we get the data, you can definitely begin work on drawing your maps, and we'll definitely have staff available to you to do that as well. but that just may not be that the goal is to try to get it ready for that special session. It may be more that you're ready to get that adopted at the very beginning, right off the bat, in the 2022 general session that will happen in January of 22. So that may be the best target just because of the window of time. We may have to play that by ear a little bit, but that's my expectation. So this is what our timeline looks like. It's definitely later than what we've ever seen before. So just so you know that and have a little bit of idea what to expect and when you can do anything. We won't be able to do much of anything as far as redistricting goes until we get that new data. So just to walk you through that, the General Assembly does pass legislation to redistrict. So they have to do it as a bill through the legislative process. That's for the statewide districts, for the U.S. House, the State Senate, the State House, and even our Public Service Commission. We do, even though those are actually residency districts, they're really big residency districts made up of whole counties, but they qualify from one of those 5 districts, but then they're voted on statewide. But we do redraw that, so as I mentioned, to make sure we have balanced qualifying pool of candidate there in each of those 5 districts. Those will be the things that are probably taken up in the special session. But we also have to have legislation to redistrict your local maps as well. Adopting it locally is not the only thing that has to happen. You do have to have legislation because it's updated into your charter. So that's for county commissions, Board of Education districts. That is not attendance zone districts. That's only for the members that are elected to your Board of Education. And independent city school boards, for instance, like the City of Atlanta schools or Marietta City schools, those types of things. Would have to have a piece of legislation to redistrict their map. The city councils actually have the option to redistrict under home rule, meaning they don't have to come through the General Assembly. They can if they would like to have legislation done. And there are some very specific provisions related to how city councils can redistrict that's included in the code, in the OCGA, and you can reference that, but it actually spells out the procedure and what they can do with that. The main thing is it only can be to redistrict their boundaries. If there's any other changes happening to the council, whether it's changing the method of election, you want to go from at-large to district, or you want to go from 3 districts and 2 at-large to 4 districts and 1 at-large, then all of those types of changes for a city have to happen through legislation. The only thing home rule allows for is just changing the map. So everybody else, if you're doing these other things, would need legislation, and that means the General Assembly has to be in session in order to adopt that legislation. So just keep that in mind as you're working through the process. And that's my basic redistricting information to get you started. I know it's kind of a lot to think about. It's a lot to consider, but it is how we work through it and what we have to know and what we have to do to work through this, to draw the maps. It's a lot of things to think about. So if you take a minute and let you digest that and think about it, I don't know if you want to have questions on that information now, or if you want to wait till the end. Stephen, that's totally up to you all how you want to do that. Whatever you think.
You want to do questions now in this section, or just keep going? Looks like we'll keep going.
Okay, great. Okay, so the process for local governments is a little bit different, as I alluded to a minute ago, because you have different steps you have to go through than what we have to do with the statewide maps. At the local level, your redistricting maps, of course, there can be more than one. You can have other things to consider, such as your county might have the same map for your county commission as your school board, which means both of you have to work on it in agreement to adopt a new map, and that can sometimes be a challenge because you're dealing with 2 different elected boards. So there are other things to consider, but the biggest thing to consider is some changes that were made to the process and the steps in the process just recently. So I want to go over all that with you. So what we learned in 2011 and 2012 with the local redistricting process is that local governments were coming up with new ways to draw their own maps. They were exploring different options, which is not a bad thing. We've got a lot of new technology out there now, new programs that are available. There was a lot of new interest in redistricting that had not been there really before. And so we saw that there was a lot of different things that we had not encountered as we worked through the process in 2011 and 2012 and even into 2013 to help local governments with their maps. So because of the changes that we saw, sometimes it caused us to have some hiccups and some bumps in the road that would cause delays in the process. And we didn't want to see that happen again, because what that did was create some extra work for my staff in my office, but also extra work for the local governments. And what I mean by that was there would be times when the map has to be prepared for legislation, it has to come through my office. So we would do an analysis of the thing, of the map and of the data, and sometimes we'd find technical issues or some type of issue that's bigger than that. Sometimes we found actual violations of the Voting Rights Act because we didn't draw that map in our office and it was sent to us. And so what we would do then, of course, we'd notify that legislator, and of course the legislator would be like, well, go fix it. If they don't want to adopt legislation that's got any issues. It could be something small. It could be a technical thing where maybe a precinct was split for a handful of people, which creates what we call a voter anonymity issue, because their ballot, how they vote, would basically be public when that precinct is listed. They'd be the only people in there with that combo. So things like that are a part of the process of reviewing that we would do. But we just found these bumps in the road, and that just stalled the process at that point. So in 2019, I reached out to some of our legislators and requested that we put together a piece of legislation to organize the steps in the process of local redistricting to prevent these delays from happening and to prevent these bumps in the road, so we can try to make it a smooth process, both for the local governments and also for the legislature. And so you can actually look that up if you want to on the General Assembly's website, but make sure when you search for it that you look for 2019. It would be under the 2-year cycle of 2019-2020. So yeah, make sure you change it to not the current cycle, and look up Senate Bill 177. And this is going to tell you all the very specifics and the details to it. But I'm going to explain it to you, and I'm going to show it to you in a visual way also to hopefully help you understand what you need to do in the process. So the first thing that you would want to do before you start the process of redrawing, you've already maybe got your data and looked at your analysis. You know what you're ready to work on a map. Is first thing you want to do is request one of your legislators to sponsor you. Now this would be the first step, whether you want to work with my office or whether you choose to use something else. But either way, you're going to have them sponsor legislation. So it's a good thing to go ahead and give them a heads up that you're ready to work on redrawing your map. It can be one of your members of the House, the state House. It can be your state senator. Doesn't matter who. Any of them is fine. As far as my office is concerned, all we ask for them to do is send us a letter on their letterhead, or it can be an email as long as it's got their email signature on it, that just says, I, Senator Wright, sponsor Henry County to work with the Reapportionment Office on their commission map, or whatever. That's all it has to say. It doesn't have to be complicated, but we're going to file that and keep that on your county file in our office, so we know who the contact is in the General Assembly, at least through the process. They may or may not be the member who ends up carrying your bill and your legislation, but at least through the process of working with you all, they're going to be the one who we know to contact. So that's the first thing you want to do. Reach out to them. You can reach out to all of them, honestly, and just say, just want you to be aware that our county is ready to work on this process. And I'm sure they'll be fine to just even do that, even if they don't have to take action. Yeah, so this is what I just said. So you can reach out to a senator or representative, and they need to notify my office. And the only other thing to consider is that your county delegations, which is the different grouping of legislators who represent your county, they may have specific requirements that they want your government to meet before they're willing to do legislation. There have been county delegations in the past who wanted a unanimous vote on a map before they would do a bill. That's not all of them, and I don't know all of the rules for the different ones. So you would need to just ask, if you have multiple legislators that represent your county, do they have any delegation requirements as far as that goes? Not to say that you'll have controversy, but sometimes redistricting causes controversy. So to eliminate that, you might just ask up front, so you'll know what you're working with before you even draw the map. So the next step you want to do is to determine who you want to work with to create your map. You have options. Obviously, as I said, we saw options increased over the 2011-2012 cycle. It was a little different in the past because there wasn't a lot of that. Technology wasn't so widespread in 2001 and 2, and pretty much everybody came to my office to do it. In 2001 and 2, I was brand new. I was right out of college, and local redistricting is what I started on. That's what I keep on, and I worked with lots of counties and lots of cities to work on their maps. Because really we were kind of the only option then to do that, and they had to do it to get their legislation done. So you are definitely welcome to come and work with my staff. I have a super local redistricting coordinator. His name is Brian Knight. You're definitely fine to reach out to him, and he will work with you. And then we're going to have additional staff that can work on local redistricting, because we know all 159 counties more or less are going to need to do something. So it'll be a lot of stuff to do, but you are definitely welcome to work with us. You may have a GIS department in your county. You may have something in your planning department who has the capabilities to do this with software. You may choose to work with other consultants or groups. You might work with the regional commission. You might hire an independent redistricting consultant. There are definitely other ways you could choose to do it. So I want to go through that a little bit, and what the choice was, what your choice would mean as far as the process goes, because it actually does make a difference. If you choose to work with my office, it's going to be a small plug here. What you're going to be able to access is, first of all, we work for the General Assembly. So we're already involved in the process and what's going to need to be done to get your legislation done. So it's going to make that easier. My staff and me, this is what we do all the time. But redistricting is what we are trained to do, what we have experienced, what we work in, and are constantly honing our skills and understanding the changes in the law and the changes in what we need to know specifically to redistricting. This is what we do. We also don't charge anything to the local governments to do this, because it's obviously is part of what the legislature is going to have to do as far as changing those. So it's free to you to work with us, and we are glad to help do it. Like I said, this is what we do. So for the people who work in my office, like, we really like doing it. I know that sounds crazy, because who would like it? But we really do like doing this, and we love working with all the different groups too, and getting to know so much about our state. I mean, I've learned so much in 20 years about our state just by working with all the different counties and knowing about the things in your local areas. So, but we're really glad to do that, and it does make it a little bit easier, as you're going to see in the process slide here in a minute. So you can also choose to use, like I said, GIS staff or other consultants, regional commissions, other groups that might want to get involved in this and might offer their services to you. So what you would do, whether you work with us or with them, first thing you're going to do after we've looked at your current numbers and your data is to draw a map. You're going to draw a map, and that can be multiple different ways you can do it. You can request just a proposal. You can just say, take what we have and make as little change to it as possible, and make sure it complies with everything. And that's what we want. You can just have it done that way and then look at a proposal. Or maybe your county is one who wants to be all involved in the process. So you want to have a meeting and you want everybody to be there and you want them to talk about what they want to see. We've done that as well. But you're going to need to draw a map of some sort. And once you come up with a map that you think everybody likes, didn't draw anything, that someone's mad about or whatever, well, you might, because that happens too. But you got a map that you're okay with. If you've used anyone outside of my office, you're going to need to then submit that map to my office for technical review. This is the next step in the process. What we're going to do is look for things like unassigned blocks, or maybe if it went outside the county boundary, or do you have that voter anonymity issue? Do you have any Voting Rights Act, issues? Do you have, whatever we can look at? We're going to look at all of it, and then we're going to let you know what we found. So what I want to make sure you know is that this needs to be before your board takes any action to adopt the map. So no adoption of resolutions or anything yet at that point. We want to review it first. This is how we're trying to eliminate those bumps in the process, because what we want is, when it's adopted, we want it to smooth sail and be ready to go into a bill. So before you adopt it, you send it for technical review, and then you're going to get a certification form. We're just going to send you back. It's probably going to come from me or Brian. That'll say, we reviewed your map, everything was great. You're definitely keep moving forward in the process, and you'll get that. If there's concerns, because we found something that we thought, well, you had this block that was not assigned, or you crossed over this river right here, and I'm not sure you meant to, or did you not? You may not, maybe you didn't see it because you had to zoom in like super, super, super detailed. But if we find anything that we think should be fixed, the adjustments can be made in two ways. Like, my office can make those adjustments, or we can send it back to the county or the city, and you can make the adjustments of whoever drew your map. But that would also cause another little bump, because then it's going to have to come back again. Once you've made those changes, we're going to need to review it one more time, because what we want to do is, before you adopt it locally, we want to be sure that it is ready for legislation. It's good to go, and there's nothing that's going to delay it. So, like I said, if it's made outside, if the changes are made wherever outside my office, then you're going to need to do another review. It kind of kicks back before that certification is provided. So if you're a visual learner, and I know some people are, and I just like to make this because I thought this would help. This is what that process would look like if you don't work with my office. The only difference in working with my office is that we're going to be doing that review as we go. So as we draw the map, we're going to be sure that it's compliant with everything as we go. So you're literally going to be able to jump from drawing the map to just the, adopting it locally. So that you're going to go from the top box down to the green box, because we won't have to do any of the review and the certification for that. But if you're using anyone outside of our office, other commissions, GIS groups, consultants, or whatever, here, this is the way it would look. So at the top, you draw your map, then you send it to my office for review. And one of two options can happen from that. Like I mentioned, it'll go, technical certification will come, and that'll give you the green light to adopt it locally, and then we'll notify your legislator. Or we'll find potential issues and we'll send it back to you. And then you have two choices. Either we can make those adjustments for you and send it back to you fixed. We can do that. Or we can send it back and you can have your consultant or whoever fix it there. And then if you see the red arrow, then that would be what sends you back to the top, when almost the top, just to start that review process over again. And I will go ahead and say, and I think it mentions in the bill specifically, if for some reason you don't think that you agree with what we pointed out in your technical concerns, even if we said this was an issue and you say, no, it's not an issue and we like it, and then your legislator you go to and they say, we don't think it's an issue, we're going to go with it, then that's fine. If the legislator says that they're okay with moving it in whatever format they say, then that is up to them. It will not get a certification from my office, but only the legislator can kind of override that and say, we still want to go forward with this, because ultimately it's going to come to them for legislation. So they have to be okay with it. Otherwise, if there's friction between what you all want and what the legislator wants, well, I'm going to stay out of that fight and let y'all handle that on your own. So this is just the process, though, and I hope that helps visualize it a little bit more clearly for you. So after that certification happens and you got to the green square, then you'll be able to do the process at your local level. So whatever that is, whether it's a resolution, if you have requirements in that process that's a part of your county government, maybe you have some system already set up or a historical system, how you do it. That may involve the advertisement. It may involve having a public hearing on your map, or more than one, depending upon what your local group does there. But all of that can then take place once you've gotten that certification. I mean, you could theoretically have some public hearings before that. Only problem is if you've had a public hearing and then you find there's something on the map that has to change, then you're going to have another one to say, oh, well, we had to edit the map or whatever, or you might not. But that's something to consider, that you might then need to make adjustments, and then you have to show it to the public again if that's part of your process. So whatever that yields, you would then adopt the map locally with a resolution. And then you're going to want to notify your legislators that you've got it finished, and they might want that copy of a resolution. Some will, some won't. They're all different. And also feel free at that point to notify my office that you've adopted it. You can do that by email. That's no big thing. I'm sure at that point, if you've worked with us and you've already been in touch with us for your certification, one way or the other, you either worked with us or you got your certification, you'll have a contact info, and you can send us a quick email and say, hey, we adopted our commission map last night. And we'll know that, and we can update that in your record, so we'll know that your next step will be legislation. Legislation on this third bullet point, legislation will not be drafted, though, until it's requested by the legislator. So just because we know your county drew a map, and just because we certified it, and just because we know that you sent us an email and said, oh, we adopted it, we're still not going to take any action on doing anything until that legislator, whoever's going to carry your bill, comes and says, I need you to prep the description for legislative council for the legislation. We do prep it in our office. We send that description of the map to the attorneys and legislative council, but we don't do that until the legislator asks for it. And sometimes they may go through the attorney to do it, but it needs to come from them. We don't automatically create that. Obviously, if we're doing this for so many, you can see why we would be busy, but we will do it as soon as we're asked by them. So that's where that has to come from. So another reason why you want to make sure after you've adopted it and gone through all the process, you notify them and let them know so they can do it. There is also some time frame with the legislation, because they too have to run an ad. And that ad for the bill can only be done obviously in your legal organ, whatever your newspaper there is that does that. And so some of those I know only print on whatever day of the week. So keep that in mind too as another time consideration, that it has to be run for so many days before the bill is dropped. So that's also another often overlooked fact with the local legislation. So that also has to be done. But that, again, that's done by the legislator once they're getting ready to do the bill. So as a part of your redistricting process, and I know I'm telling you a bazillion things about your redistricting process, but there are some conversations that I think you want to consider in the process, before the process, during the process. And some of these I've mentioned already and some of them I haven't. Obviously, I've mentioned this, your legislators, keep your senators and representatives aware of what's going on. There are some who want to be very involved. They want to know what you're doing. They want to be aware of the process, and they like to be hands-on. There are others who you might say something to them, and then you might not hear anything else until they get the bill moving or whatever. So there, it just depends on their interest and their level of involvement with the local redistricting process. It varies, but still keep them aware. It won't hurt to let them know what's going on, and it can only be beneficial to you to do that. County attorneys and school board attorneys, they are going to be your legal counsel. Obviously, they are your legal counsel, so make sure they are aware of the process, involved in the process, because that's going to be who can give you legal advice on what to do with your map. My office, we are not attorneys, so we are not going to give you that legal advice on what to do and what not to do. We're only going to give you redistricting guidance from a technical standpoint. So legal advice, you're going to definitely want to reach out to those attorneys and make sure they know what you're doing and what's going on. And if there's questions about the legality of something, then that's where you want to go first. And if they don't know, then we're glad to direct them, somewhere that they might find an answer if they don't know where to go. But I'll make sure that they know what you're doing. This one is important to me, your county election supervisors. You might not think that it would be important to consider them in the redistricting process, but they are going to be very much affected by how you draw your maps. It is their job to take whatever map you draw and then apply it to the voters and the people in your county or your city or whoever. So it is very important to them what you do and how you draw the lines. There are some county election supervisors who, again, want to be involved in the process, who have opinions about what they think would be the better map or the way to do it. There are others who've never done this before and have no clue. So anything you can do to keep them up to speed and involved would be helpful. They will be the recipient of it after the legislation is done. They are going to be the ones who translate that into ballot combos and voter assignments. So just be mindful of them as you're working through the process. Won't hurt. You might say, reach out to them, invite them to a meeting or something, and they may be like, no, I don't want to do anything with it. That's fine. But they will then know that you're at least working on it and that they need to be preparing for that change, because it's going to come to them ultimately at the very end of the process. And also your county and your city residents. I know some of you do probably have part of your process is to have a public hearing, but be aware that they want to participate. Redistricting, I can tell you, has become much more of interest to people. They're aware that the maps are going to change a lot, or not everybody, but there are definitely more people interested in the process now than there used to be. So just be mindful of that as well, that you want to consider, maybe you do want to take feedback and have your own hearing and let people give you information on their thoughts. Just something to consider. None of this stuff is required. Well, the legislators kind of is required, but other than that, these are just things I would encourage you to consider as you work through the process, and what I've seen in the past and what's useful with local redistricting. Keeping all these people involved and at least aware of the process, is going to be helpful to making it all flow as smoothly as possible. So as I just mentioned, the implementation of the map will become official upon its passage by the General Assembly and signature by the governor. Depending upon how it's worded, sometimes they can become law without his signature. Usually, I think, and I don't think he'll veto it. That's not to say he couldn't, but he could, I guess. But if it's finally adopted, most of the time what's going to happen is it'll be adopted by the General Assembly and it becomes law. Should the HR 4, the House resolution I mentioned in Congress right now, reinstate that pre-clearance provision, it would change that process. It would kick it back to what it was like before 2013. And that would mean once the map is adopted by the General Assembly, it then has to be submitted for pre-clearance to the DOJ. What would happen then is there is a whole lot of documents and information that has to be sent with that submission. There is a step-by-step of how to do a submission. That could change. It could be different from before. But if you've not done that before, that's definitely something that your attorney would have to be involved in. Usually it is the attorneys who do that, your county attorney, your school board attorney, who do those pre-clearance submissions. This is all a big if, nothing firm on that yet. But what would happen in the past is they would have 60 days, 2 months basically, to consider your submission and respond. If they respond and ask for additional information, it would trigger an additional 60 days. So that could really cause a time delay. So just keep that in mind. If that did happen, like I said, a big if that happened, then this would be the process that would happen. And then it would not really be official until they have pre-cleared that map. And that is when it would then become official for use at the county level and for election. Maps, data, and any assistance that your county needs, that your government needs, that your elected officials need will be provided to you from my office. If there's, of course, if you've got your own GIS, they can print off their own maps and things. But if there's anything my office can provide to your local government once that map is adopted by the General Assembly, if it's for your pre-clearance submission or it's after you've been approved, my office is glad to print things, to provide things, digital files, whatever you need. The only thing that I would say is that that's got to be at your request. We don't automatically distribute all of that stuff to the counties, but we are glad to do it at their request. So you just have to reach out and let us know what you need, and we'll be glad to help you get that and get things ready for implementing the maps at the local level to be used for, hopefully, for election maybe next year if everything goes according to smooth process. And quick process, which I think is also going to be important in this next cycle, is that everything goes without any hiccups in the road. I will also tell you in advance that the plan is on our new updated General Assembly website. I don't know if you've actually looked at that yet. We did a lot of work last year. There were a lot of folks involved in updating the General Assembly's page, and under our reapportionment page, which is under joint offices, we hope to have a tab for local maps, and that would actually include your new maps. We're going to only do that moving forward, what gets adopted in the next cycle, because we just didn't see going back and trying to add all the old ones. But that would at least provide at least one point of reference online for people to be able to see a PDF, just a printable map of your newest commission and school board maps once they get adopted and finalized. That's down the road. It's not, that local tab is not there yet. Statewide maps are posted there, but the local stuff will come down the road as it becomes available to us and once the process completes. So that might be something that you'll want to use or refer people to also down the road. Hopefully we don't look like this when we redraw, but sometimes it feels like this when you're trying to make all the pieces fit. But at this point, I'd be glad to take questions if anybody has any questions, and I don't know how Stephen wants to do that, but I think I can hear from him. If you speak, I guess I can hear it.
You can hear from me. You should be able to hear from everybody in here to speak out.
Okay.
Question?
Is there a deadline for when the state says that you have to have the redistricting?
So I heard, is there a deadline? I didn't hear all of it. Is there a deadline for the state to redraw?
No, for the state and to have local government redistrict.
Okay, yeah. So no, there's not an official date to make sure it's all done by. What we've always said is you can do it as soon as you want, but know that if you don't, then you do always leave yourself open to potential litigation against the fact that the districts are imbalanced in population, especially if they are extremely imbalanced. Then there's always the possibility someone could sue and say these districts aren't fair because they haven't been redrawn. So what you don't want to do is delay to the point of causing that to happen. For cities, there's a little section in the code under redrawing for municipalities that mentions doing it in time for the next election following the census. But I think there's obviously going to be some issue because some cities have elections this year. And so there's not going to be time for them to redraw. We won't have the data in time for them to redraw for election this year. So I think that's going to either be updated or it may be that that's just understood that that's okay. So there might not be challenges because we know the data is what it is, getting it when we do.
So we're to rely on the data that you send us to redraw our district maps? Did I understand that correctly, that we should rely on your data to do that?
So census data is usually considered the official data. If you were to do your own redistricting using something other than the census data, you'd take that up. I don't know that we've not ever done that, and I don't know in the states if there's something that specifically says that for local redistricting. I think it refers to using the census data for the statewide redistricting, but the hurdle you have to jump in is convincing legislators that you use something else and that it's accurate and more accurate than the census data, if that was what you chose to do.
No, what I was referring to is, I understood you to say that certain data would be available by July, and from July to September. And I'm asking is that the data that you provide, and I know it would come from Census, but is that the data we use, or can we access data from the Census ourselves? Can you,
Okay.
you have to be certified by the state for us to use the data.
So you would, I think you will be able to download and access the census block data that will come. It'll be after July, so it won't be until August, and it could be as late as the end of September. But you should be able eventually to access that. The first round of release to the data is obviously going to go to the governor and the leadership in both parties and in both chambers, and it'll go to my office. So I'm not sure exactly when it will be available for you to pull down at the local level. It may be a day or so after the initial release. But yes, you can access it yourself. You don't have to just get it from my office. There's a way to get it, but it will be requiring the right software to use it, I think.
If we choose to have to get request assistance from your office, how early should that be?
I didn't hear that question.
He asked if the county wanted assistance from your office, how early should they make that request?
Oh, that's a great question. I haven't even really thought about that. Really, anytime, I guess, even this summer, you could begin the request for the work. We wouldn't be able to do anything right away, but you could definitely go ahead and reach out if your board makes the decision to do that this summer, maybe June or July, and go ahead and have that and let us know and let your legislator know if that's what you wanted to do to begin that. And that actually makes me think about some things I need to do to prepare for that. So I appreciate that question, because I could have Brian go ahead and start on preparing for counties we know who have requested our assistance. So yeah, you could definitely go ahead and make that request this summer.
We will be able to come down there like we have in the past, right? We set in the room and set our district in your office like previous Tuesday.
So that conversation has not yet been had with my bosses, which should be the speaker and lieutenant governor. Right now, of course, they're in session and things are not the same, obviously, and the method of who's allowed and where the buildings and the meetings and things are definitely different. So we may have to work out some logistical things before we can do that. But the earliest it would be fall. I mean, because we won't have data. We won't have anything to show you until then.
That's right. Okay. Thank you.
And hopefully if pandemic things improve and continue to go down and vaccines go up, or whatever the method is to make things better, maybe it'll be an easier scenario by fall for us to hold those meetings and have people in the office and things.
Do you have a recommendation on the software to use or on GIS departments to be doing the math?
That's a great question too. We always have used Maptitude for redistricting. Maptitude is a product, comes from Caliber Corporation. We've had that for 20 plus years. It's been longer than I've been there, but it's a great software program and it's really easy to use with redistricting. But there are others I know that are equally good. There are some other specific things. I think Esri has a product that's pretty good for redistricting as well. But those are the two big ones that I know of that will be very user friendly as far as doing that to draw your own maps if you were looking at doing that.
All right. So if no one else has any questions, we'll thank Gina for being with us today, and we appreciate you presenting and giving us all this information.
Sure, I'm glad to do it. I really appreciate the opportunity. And if any questions come up after the fact, or you think about it, or you have conversations, feel free to reach out to me. This is where I'm located, and that is our phone number and my email address. And I can actually put this presentation into like a PDF or something and send it to you, Stephen, later if you want to, so they'll have a copy. They'll have a copy of it then. But I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, let us know if we can be of further assistance to you as you start to think about this and get ready for redrawing our maps.
All right. Well, we appreciate it.
Thank
Have a good
you.
one.
You too.